Most battles don't announce themselves with the roar of diesel engines. But the morning I rounded the bend toward my lakeside cabin, two bulldozers were crouched across my driveway like armored beasts waiting for prey. Their buckets were lowered, their yellow frames streaked with mud from some earlier conquest, and heat shimmered above their idling motors. Between them, framed by the rising sun, stood Karen, the self-crowned queen of the neighboring HOA. Her silhouette sharp against the glare, a clipboard tucked under one arm like a judge's gavel. I had chosen this strip of land precisely because it lay outside the HOA's reach, a thin sliver of county property they couldn't govern. Or so I thought. Seeing her there, blocking my only way in, felt less like a neighborly dispute and more like an ambush on hostile territory. For a heartbeat, I wondered if this was a misunderstanding. Maybe roadwork. Maybe a delivery gone wrong. But the smirk playing at the corners of Karen's lips shattered that illusion. This wasn't random. This was a message. The air smelled of churned dirt and hot oil, and somewhere a crow cawed like punctuation to the absurdity. I'd heard whispers from Bob, the old fisherman 2 lots down, that Karen had been scheming, combing through maps, convinced my freedom was an insult to her authority. But I hadn't believed she'd go this far. 2 bulldozers weren't just overkill. They were a declaration of war. Curiosity gnawed at me even through the anger. Why today? Why bring in machines that could flatten a house to stop one pickup truck? What leverage did she think she had that could make this stunt stick? The answer wasn't obvious, and that mystery kept my pulse quick and my thoughts racing. The HOA had no legal claim on my property, and Karen knew it. At least, she should have known it. Unless she'd found something. Some loophole. Some buried clause she could twist like a knife. The possibility sent a cold ripple through me even as the morning sun burned bright. I eased my truck onto the gravel shoulder and killed the engine. The sudden silence, broken only by the idling bulldozers, felt heavier than any shouting match. Dust swirled in lazy spirals. Karen didn't move. She didn't need to. The sheer audacity of the scene spoke louder than words. In her mind, this was already her victory lap. A few of her loyalists lurked just beyond the machines, phones raised, recording. They wanted proof. Proof that the HOA queen could break a man's resolve before breakfast. They'd get proof. All right, but not the kind they expected. That I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, my mind already spinning through possibilities. If Karen believed a couple of engines and a clipboard could trap me, she hadn't accounted for how many storms I'd weathered on construction sites or how many rules I'd learned to read more closely than the people who wrote them. My cabin, my land, my freedom, they weren't up for negotiation. And while she believed the bulldozers symbolized her power, to me they were something else entirely. The first crack in her facade, the overreach that would undo her reign. Somewhere beyond the lake, a chainsaw whined faintly. A reminder that the world outside this petty battlefield carried on indifferent to her theatrics. I stood there, pretending to study the dust on my boots. I felt the first flicker of a plan, half-formed, dangerous, delicious. Karen thought this was the day she shut me out. She couldn't see that by dragging those bulldozers here, she had handed me the very weapon I'd need to turn the neighborhood against her. What she didn't know was that I had been quietly gathering my own pieces of the puzzle. Old bylaws, county plats, whispers of her secret violations. And once the right moment came, the entire spectacle she'd staged this morning would become the spark that burned her paper crown to ash. The stillness after the bulldozer's growl felt almost louder than their engines. A tense pause before the inevitable storm. I walked back to my truck and leaned casually against the door, acting as if I had nowhere urgent to be. Inside, my thoughts moved with the precision of a carpenter measuring twice before cutting once. Karen's stunt wasn't just theater. It was a calculated push to humiliate me in front of her audience. And humiliation was a powerful weapon when you thrived on fear. But fear cuts both ways, and I could already feel the edges of her plan fraying. If she'd gone this far, she must have overlooked something, some fragile part of her empire that couldn't withstand scrutiny. The more I considered it, the clearer it became that her choice of bulldozers was not only reckless but symbolic, too loud. Heavy machines meant to intimidate rather than persuade, a show of strength masking insecurity. My mind sifted through every scrap of local knowledge I'd picked up since buying the cabin. County zoning maps, conversations with the clerk at the bait shop, The story Bob once muttered about Karen's questionable renovation on community land. Each memory snapped into place like puzzle pieces forming a picture of hypocrisy. She might have power over those too timid to question her. But the law was a different beast entirely. And it didn't bend for her OWY late afternoon. The bulldozers were gone, hauled off after an entire morning of blocking my drive, while I simply waited them out from a nearby diner. Sipping coffee and quietly texting a friend on the county board. Karen had left in a huff, her loyalists dispersing like startled birds once they realized I wasn't going to lose my temper on camera. The calm way I returned to my cabin only seemed to deepen their confusion. To them, a man who didn't fight back must be plotting something worse. And they were right. That night, under a sky dusted with stars, I sat on my porch with an old binder of property records, flipping through faded pages that still smelled faintly of damp paper. There it was in black and white. The HOA's authority stopped exactly 20 feet short of my driveway. Even more telling was a small footnote about easement access. The very ground where Karen had positioned those bulldozers was not only beyond her jurisdiction, but technically county-maintained. That meant she had trespassed with heavy equipment on land she didn't own or control. The irony was as sharp as a nail head catching sunlight. The next day, whispers started drifting along the shoreline like ripples after a stone toss. Bob ambled over while I repaired a loose deck plank, his voice low but tinged with amusement as he mentioned that Karen's little blockade had rattled even her own supporters. The Martins, who had always nodded obediently in meetings, were apparently questioning whether Karen's obsession with control had gone too far. Even the bait shop clerk chuckled when he asked if I'd enjoyed the bulldozer parade. Word spreads quickly in small communities, and Karen's stunt had become a story, one that painted her less as a leader and more as a desperate queen clutching at power. I let the rumors grow without feeding them, because nothing fuels curiosity like unanswered questions. Neighbors began looking at me differently, not as an outsider, but as someone who might finally puncture the bubble Karen had built around herself. That evening, I drove quietly into town and visited the county office. The clerk, a gray-haired woman who'd seen every kind of neighborly feud imaginable, helped me pull the most recent maps and HOA filings. Together, we discovered something even juicier than I'd hoped. The HOA's claim to enforce standards on properties outside its boundaries had been explicitly rejected in a legal note last year after a previous dispute with a different homeowner. Karen had either forgotten or ignored it, and now her blockade wasn't just petty. It was a blatant violation of county law. I photocopied everything, tucking the papers into my binder with a sense of growing satisfaction. She had wanted a spectacle, but what she had given me was leverage. Back at the lake, dusk settled like a velvet curtain over the water. The frogs croaked in chorus while the last traces of sunlight painted the bulldozer tracks in the gravel a deep, rusty gold. I stared at those tracks for a long time, imagining the story they told. An HOA president so drunk on power that she'd brought industrial machinery to a personal grudge match. The sight filled me with an unexpected calm. This wasn't just about a blocked driveway anymore. It was about drawing a line in the sand, or, in this case, the gravel, that bullies couldn't cross without consequence. Karen had revealed her arrogance for everyone to see, and in doing so, she had cracked the image of invincibility she'd cultivated for years. The quiet thrill of that realization hummed under my skin like the vibration of a distant engine. Day's night deepened. I reviewed my plan. I would not retaliate with noise or anger. That was Karen's way. Instead, I would turn her own rules, her beloved bylaws, against her. I would gather neighbors one by one, not by pleading but by listening, letting their resentment for her overreach spill out until they were ready to act. And when the next HOA meeting came, I would step into that room with a binder thick enough to sink her throne. But more than that, I sensed there was a deeper twist waiting to be uncovered. Karen was desperate for a reason to extend her authority beyond the HOA's borders, desperate enough to risk legal trouble. Somewhere in her actions was a hidden motive, something she hadn't revealed yet. And the thought of unearthing that secret filled me with a curiosity that burned hotter than anger. Whatever she was hiding, I would find it. Whatever game she was playing, I would end it on my terms. The lake lay still beneath the stars, and for the first time since seeing those bulldozers, I smiled. The real story hadn't even begun yet. The days that followed Karen's blockade unfolded with a deceptive calm that only sharpened the tension underneath. On the surface, the neighborhood appeared unchanged. Boats drifted lazily across the lake. Wind chimes tinkled from porches, and sprinklers hissed over manicured lawns. But in the quiet corners of grocery aisles and beside gas pumps, whispers about the bulldozers swirled like smoke. The Martins, usually eager to appease Karen, had been overheard questioning her judgment. Bob reported that two families who'd once been her strongest supporters had skipped the last informal HOA gathering entirely, citing schedule conflicts that fooled no one. Even the bait shop clerk grinned knowingly when he handed me my bait, remarking that Karen's construction stunt was the best entertainment the lake had seen in years. Beneath that casual humor, I sensed the shift. A community that had tiptoed for years under Karen's rules was beginning to look around and realize the Queen's throne wasn't bolted to the floor. My binder of evidence thickened quietly. Late one night, under the glow of a single lamp, I cross-referenced the HOA's bylaws against county records and discovered a particularly telling entry. A clause confirming that heavy machinery could not be stationed on public easements without explicit county approval. The bulldozers' tire tracks across my driveway weren't just an embarrassment for Karen, they were documented violations. Even more damning was a line item buried in meeting minutes from 2 years earlier. The HOA had failed to renew its annual insurance coverage for off-property enforcement actions after a budget dispute. That meant Karen had exposed the association to legal liability with her stunt, a detail her loyalists would find hard to forgive once they learned she had risked their wallets to satisfy her ego. The realization settled over me like the final piece of a jigsaw puzzle clicking into place. The game wasn't about one driveway anymore. It was about exposing the rot in a power structure propped up by fear and arrogance. One evening, I took a slow walk around the neighborhood's edge, deliberately choosing a route that would let the more watchful residents see me, but not invite conversation. I could feel their eyes follow me from behind curtains and porch railings, their curiosity prickling the air. They'd seen Karen's overreach. Now they wanted to know what I would do. By not reacting explosively, I had turned their attention into anticipation, and anticipation was a powerful ally. The lake shimmered under the sunset like a secret being kept, and I couldn't shake the sense that Karen's obsession had roots deeper than anyone suspected. Why risk so much just to extend her control? There had to be something more, some personal stake hidden behind her public posture. My hunch was confirmed the next morning when a folded piece of paper appeared wedged into the slats of my porch railing. No signature, just neat block handwriting. Check the plat records for Lot 7. The note sent a thrill through me. Lot 7 was a wooded strip of shoreline adjacent to the HOA's official boundary, a parcel often dismissed as unusable due to its rocky slope. If Karen had been scheming about my driveway, Lot 7 might hold the missing piece of her plan. I spent the afternoon at the county clerk's office again, digging through dusty binders until I found it. A record showing that the HOA had attempted to claim Lot 7 as common property years ago, but failed because the original developer's plat reserved it as an independent parcel for potential sale. That meant Karen's dream of expanding her power depended on controlling the access road. My driveway was the only practical route to Lot 7's shoreline. Her blockade hadn't been about rules at all. It had been a desperate bid to seize leverage over future development. Knowing this deepened my resolve. Karen hadn't merely trespassed. She'd gambled the HOA's reputation and resources on a personal land grab. I returned home under a sky thick with clouds, the wind off the lake carrying the promise of a storm. On my porch, the air felt electric, alive with the knowledge that the balance of power had already shifted. The neighbors didn't yet know about Lot 7 or Karen's failed claim, but they would soon. I imagined the look on their faces when the truth unraveled, the awe, the anger, the realization that they had been manipulated. Karen's aura of authority would collapse like a sandcastle against the tide. That night, thunder rolled across the hills as I prepared my final moves. I organized the binder, tucking the Lot 7 plat behind the insurance lapse records and the county's easement clause. Each page felt like a nail in the coffin of her manufactured empire. The plan was no longer simply to defend my rights. It was to expose the hypocrisy so thoroughly that no future queen could rise in her place. I checked the date of the next HOA meeting. It was in 3 days. The timing was perfect. Karen would likely stride in, emboldened by the silence of her shrinking circle, believing the worst had passed. She would press for some show of dominance, perhaps a formal motion to annex the road or to find me again. And at that moment, I would deliver the truth like a hammer blow. As I closed the binder and listened to the rain begin to patter on the roof, I felt the kind of calm that comes before a decisive strike. The bulldozers had been meant to corner me, to humiliate me publicly. Instead, they had lit a fuse that would ignite her downfall. The community, still unaware of the depth of her scheme, was watching, waiting. And when the storm broke, not the one rolling across the hills, but the one waiting in that meeting hall, the spectacle Karen had planned would belong to me. The lake outside was black glass now, reflecting flashes of lightning like sudden revelations. I stood at the window and watched the sky split open, already picturing how her carefully constructed crown would crumble under the weight of her own arrogance. The evening of the HOA meeting arrived heavy with humidity. The lake's surface glassy and expectant beneath a bruised purple sky. By the time I walked toward the community hall, a strange energy seemed to ripple through the neighborhood. Porch lights glowed earlier than usual. Clusters of neighbors lingered near driveways whispering, and even the crickets seemed to pause between chirps. Inside, the rows of metal chairs were nearly full, their occupants shifting restlessly, some eager for spectacle, others anxious to see which way the wind would blow. Karen stood at the front beside the podium, her navy blazer crisp, her expression a carefully curated mask of authority, but I caught the tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped her clipboard just a little too hard. She still believed her posture could restore the old order, that her show of confidence would erase the memory of bulldozers rumbling across county land. Yet the murmured glances darting between neighbors told a different story. Her rein was already wobbling that I took a seat near the middle, binder resting on my lap, and let the low hum of gossip wash over me. The air smelled faintly of coffee and dust, that familiar scent of small town halls where arguments about budgets and bylaws often shaped local legends. When the meeting began, Karen launched straight into a speech about protecting community integrity and addressing noncompliance before it spreads, her tone sugary yet edged with steel. She waved a stack of papers, photos of my driveway, shots of the bulldozers from angles designed to make her look heroic instead of reckless, as if they were proof of her righteousness. For a while, the room remained silent except for her voice, but silence in a crowd isn't always agreement. Sometimes it's the stillness before a shift. And the shift began subtly. A few raised eyebrows, a whisper exchanged at the back, a slight scoff from Bob that caught someone else's eye. Karen's words, once received as commands, now landed like brittle twigs snapping underfoot. When she finally moved to propose a formal motion against me, I rose slowly, letting the legs of my chair scrape deliberately against the floor, a sound sharp enough to turn heads. I didn't need to speak. The weight of the binder in my hands did the talking. I walked to the front, placed it on the table with a decisive thud, and opened to the first page. The county map showing the HOA boundary ending 20 feet shy of my driveway. Gasps fluttered like startled birds through the room. I flipped to the next set of documents. The county's easement clause, the insurance lapse, the photocopy of the failed Lot 7 claim, turning each page with steady, unhurried precision. The neighbors leaned forward, their curiosity deepening into something closer to outrage as the story unfolded silently in black and white. Karen had overstepped, risked liability, and misled them about her authority. The room's energy shifted palpably, like the sudden drop in pressure before a storm breaks. Her strongest supporters exchanged uneasy glances. One man crossed his arms. Another woman set her jaw, realizing they'd been pawns in someone else's gamble. Karen's confident posture faltered as I laid the final blow, a copy of the county's rejection of her annexation attempt for Lot 7. The paper glowed under the fluorescent lights, the words plain and undeniable. The realization spread across the room like a slow dawn. Her blockade had not been about community standards or safety, but about her personal ambition to seize leverage for future development. The whispers grew louder, splintering into open murmurs of disapproval. Someone muttered about fines she'd issued last summer for bird feeders. Another neighbor shook their head, muttering about her hypocrisy. Even the Martins, who had once parroted her every phrase, sat stiffly, no longer willing to defend her. Karen's cheeks flushed, her mouth opening as if to rally, but no sound came. Power, I realized, doesn't vanish with a bang, but with the quiet recognition that it was never absolute to begin with. The HOA board members, sensing the tide's turn, called an unscheduled vote of confidence. Their voices clipped but resolute. When the hands rose, first hesitantly, then in a wave, it was over. Karen's title dissolved under fluorescent lights and the watchful eyes of her neighbors. She lowered her clipboard slowly, her shoulders sagging as though the weight of her own arrogance had finally settled on her. She didn't meet my eyes as she gathered her papers and left the hall. Outside, thunder rolled distantly across the hills, echoing the storm that had just passed through the room that I in the days that followed. The atmosphere around the lake felt lighter, as though a dam had burst and let fresh air sweep in. Bob stopped by my cabin with 2 cold beers, chuckling that he hadn't seen the community so united in years. The Martins strung cheerful wind chimes on their porch again, saying they finally felt free to make their home their own. A couple of Karen's former loyalists even offered quiet apologies for their silence, their relief evident in their voices. As for Karen herself, she was seen walking alone by the lake one evening, no clipboard in sight, her once bright posture subdued. The bulldozers had been returned to their rightful owners, their tracks in the gravel fading with each rain, leaving behind only the story, a story everyone would retell with shaking heads and knowing smiles that I spent that weekend on my porch overlooking the water. Coffee in hand, the binder of evidence now closed and tucked safely away. The lake shimmered under a warm breeze, its surface smooth and forgiving, as if nothing had ever disturbed its peace. But I knew better. Power built on fear is fragile, and silence feeds bullies until someone stands firm. Karen had gambled on intimidation and lost, not because I shouted louder or struck harder, but because I let curiosity, preparation, and patience do the heavy lifting. The bulldozers that were meant to keep me out had instead opened the door to her undoing. And as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the lake gold, I felt the deep, steady satisfaction of a man who had not only defended his driveway, but reminded an entire community that rules, when wielded by bullies, are only as strong as the people willing to obey them blindly. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, the world was quiet again, and the driveway, my driveway, stood open, unguarded, and entirely mine.